How your brain locks you into the same life every day. Every day, you wake up. And without realizing it, you begin repeating yourself. The same thoughts. The same reactions. The same routines. The same decisions. You believe you are living freely. But in reality, your brain is running a script, quietly, efficiently, and relentlessly. This is the repetition trap. It is not obvious. It does not feel like a prison. It feels like normal life. You brush your teeth the same way. Check your phone at the same time. Think the same thoughts about yourself. React to people in predictable patterns. And slowly, almost invisibly, your life begins to solidify into something fixed. Not because you chose it, but because you repeated it. Your brain is designed for efficiency. It wants to conserve energy. So it builds shortcuts. These shortcuts become habits. These habits become patterns. And these patterns become your identity. Until one day, you look at your life and wonder, how did I end up here, and why does every day feel the same? That is the moment most people feel stuck. But what they don't realize is this. They are not stuck because of one decision. They are stuck because of thousands of repeated ones. This audiobook will expose the hidden system controlling your life. It will show you how repetition shapes your thoughts, your behaviors, and your identity. And more importantly, it will show you how to break it. Because once you see the loop, you can no longer unsee it. And once you understand it, you can finally escape it. If you're new here, subscribe to Mind Lab Audiobooks, where we break down the hidden systems shaping your mind, your behavior, and your life. Now, let's begin. Introduction. There is a quiet force shaping your life right now. You cannot see it. You cannot hear it. And most of the time, you cannot feel it. But it is there, guiding your decisions, influencing your emotions, and repeating your behaviors with remarkable precision. This force is not external. It is internal. It is the accumulated weight of everything you have done, over and over again. Most people believe their life is the result of conscious choices. They think, I decided this. I chose that. I control where I'm going. But if you slow down, if you truly observe your day, you will notice something unsettling. Much of what you do is not chosen at the moment. It is repeated. You wake up at roughly the same time. You check your phone in the same way. You think the same thoughts about your responsibilities, your problems, your identity. Even your emotional responses follow patterns. You get stressed by the same triggers. You feel motivated at predictable times. You lose focus in familiar ways. It feels natural. It feels normal. But what feels normal is often just familiar repetition. And here lies the danger. Repetition does not feel like control. It feels like life. That is why it is so powerful. Your brain is not trying to trap you. It is trying to help you. Its primary goal is efficiency. Every decision you make consumes energy. Every new action requires effort. So your brain looks for shortcuts. When you repeat something enough times, your brain encodes it into a pattern. That pattern becomes automatic. And once something becomes automatic, it requires almost no effort to repeat. This is how habits are formed. But habits are only the surface. Beneath them lies something deeper. A structure. A system. A loop. A self-reinforcing cycle where your actions shape your identity. And your identity shapes your actions. You don't just act a certain way. You begin to believe you are that way. I'm not disciplined. I'm always tired. I'm just not that kind of person. These statements are not true. They are conclusions built from repetition. And once you believe them, they become instructions. You start acting in alignment with them, again and again. Until eventually, your life reflects them perfectly. Not because they were true from the beginning, but because you repeated them into reality. This is the repetition trap. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It is subtle. It is quiet. And it works slowly. Day after day. Week after week. Year after year. Until one day, you pause. And you realize something feels off. Your life looks structured, but not intentional. Stable, but not fulfilling. Predictable, but not meaningful. You are moving. but not progressing. You are active, but not evolving. And the reason is simple. You are repeating, not creating. This audiobook exists to break that cycle. Not with motivation. Not with surface-level advice. But with clarity. You will learn to see the patterns that were once invisible. You will understand the mechanisms your brain uses to lock you into repetition. And most importantly, you will learn how to interrupt those mechanisms. Because awareness alone is not enough. You can see the loop and still stay inside it. Real change requires disruption. It requires precision. It requires understanding not just what to change, but where to apply that change for maximum effect. Each chapter will guide you deeper into this system. You will see how repetition builds your identity. How your environment reinforces your behavior. How your emotions strengthen your patterns. And how time itself becomes distorted when you live on autopilot. But more importantly, you will learn how to take control. Not by fighting your brain, but by working with it. Not by forcing massive change, but by strategically interrupting repetition. Because the truth is this: you do not need to rebuild your life from scratch. You only need to break the patterns that are building it for you. And once you do, everything begins to change. Now, let's move forward. Chapter 1: The Invisible Loop. Why your life feels stuck without you noticing. There is a loop running in your life right now. You are inside it. And the reason you cannot escape it, it is because you cannot see it. This loop is not made of walls or barriers. It is made of repetition. Small actions repeated daily. Thoughts recycled without questioning. Behaviors executed without awareness. Individually, they seem harmless. But together, they form a system. A closed circuit. A pattern that feeds itself. This is the invisible loop. And it works like this. You wake up. You follow a familiar sequence of actions. You respond to the same triggers. You think in predictable ways. You end your day in a similar emotional state. Then you repeat it. Again. And again. And again. At first, this repetition feels efficient. It saves time. It reduces stress. It creates a sense of stability. But over time, something changes. The loop becomes rigid. It stops adapting. It stops evolving. And eventually, it stops serving you. This is when life begins to feel stuck. Not because nothing is happening, but because the same things are happening. The loop creates a false sense of movement. You are busy. You are active. You are doing things. But you are not moving forward. You are circling. And circles feel like progress when you don't recognize the pattern. This is why people can spend years in the same place. Same habits. Same mindset. Same results. Not because they lack ambition, but because they are trapped in repetition. And here's the critical part. The loop is invisible because it is familiar. Your brain does not flag familiar patterns as problems. It flags them as safe. So instead of questioning the loop, you defend it. You justify your routines. You rationalize your habits. You normalize your limitations. And without realizing it, you protect the very system that keeps you stuck. This is why change feels uncomfortable. Not because change is inherently difficult, but because it breaks familiarity. And your brain resists that. It prefers the known over the unknown. Even if the known is limiting. So it keeps you inside the loop. Repeating. Reinforcing. Recycling. Until the loop becomes your life. But here is the turning point. The moment you see the loop, it begins to weaken. Because awareness disrupts automation. When you notice a pattern, it is no longer invisible. And once it is visible, it can be challenged. This is where control begins. Not by changing everything at once, but by identifying what is being repeated. Because you cannot break a loop you cannot see. Chapter 1 Summary. The invisible loop is a system of repeated thoughts, behaviors, and routines that create the illusion of progress while keeping your life static. It is not obvious because it feels normal. It is not questioned because it feels safe. But over time, it becomes restrictive. You are not stuck because of a lack of effort. You are stuck because of repeated patterns. Awareness is the first step to breaking the loop. Practical exercises. Pattern recognition audit. Observe your day from start to finish. Identify at least 10 actions you perform automatically without thinking. Repetition mapping. Write down your daily routine in detail. Highlight areas that are identical every day. Trigger awareness. Notice emotional triggers. What situations consistently cause stress, distraction, or avoidance? Loop identification question. Ask yourself, what part of my life feels the same every day? That is where the loop is strongest. Now, in the next chapter, we go deeper into the mechanism behind this loop. Because repetition does not happen randomly. It is driven by a fundamental principle inside your brain. Efficiency. Coming up next. Chapter 2, The Brain's Efficiency Addiction. How your mind automates everything to save energy. Chapter 2, The Brain's Efficiency Addiction. How your mind automates everything to save energy. Your brain has a primary objective. It is not happiness. It is not a success. It is not fulfilling. It is efficient. Every second of your life, your brain is managing an enormous amount of information. Sensory input. Decisions. Predictions. Emotional responses. If it had to process everything consciously, you would be overwhelmed within minutes. So it evolved a solution. Automation. Your brain constantly looks for patterns it can compress into shortcuts. Anything repeated enough times becomes easier to execute. And eventually, it becomes automatic. This is not a flaw. It is a survival mechanism. In the past, efficiency meant survival. The faster your brain could recognize patterns, the quicker you could react to danger, find food, and navigate your environment. But in modern life, this same mechanism creates a different outcome. Instead of helping you survive, it locks you into repetition. Here is how it works. The first time you do something, it requires attention, effort, energy. Your brain is fully engaged. The second time, it becomes slightly easier. The third time, even more. With enough repetition, your brain begins to predict the sequence. It no longer needs full attention. It starts to automate the process. This is where habits begin. But the process doesn't stop there. As automation increases, awareness decreases. You begin to perform actions without noticing them. You drive without remembering the journey. You scroll without realizing how long you've been scrolling. You react without thinking. And here's the critical shift. When awareness decreases, control decreases. You are still acting. But you are no longer choosing. Your brain is executing stored instructions. And because these instructions are efficient, your brain prefers them. It will always choose the path that requires the least energy, even if that path leads to stagnation. This is the efficiency trap. Your brain is not asking, is this helping you grow? It is asking, is this easy to repeat? And whatever is easiest, wins. That is why people stay in routines that no longer serve them. That is why bad habits persist. That is why change feels difficult. Because change requires energy. It requires breaking patterns, creating new pathways, engaging conscious thought. And your brain resists that. Not because it wants to harm you, but because it wants to conserve resources. This creates a powerful bias toward the familiar. The more you repeat something, the easier it becomes. The easier it becomes, the more likely you are to repeat it. This is a feedback loop. Efficiency strengthens repetition. Repetition strengthens efficiency. And over time, this loop becomes dominant. Your life starts to organize itself around what is easiest to repeat. Not what is most meaningful. Not what is most effective. Just what is easiest. This is why people often feel stuck despite wanting change. They are not lacking motivation. They are fighting against a system designed to resist effort. And here is where most people make a mistake. They try to overcome this system with force. They rely on willpower. They push themselves to act differently. But willpower is limited. Efficiency is constant. So eventually, the brain wins. You fall back into old patterns. Not because you are weak, but because the system is stronger than your intention. So the solution is not to fight efficiency. It is to understand it. And then, redirect it. Because the same mechanism that traps you can also free you. If you can make new behaviors efficient. If you can reduce the friction of change. If you can repeat new patterns enough times. Your brain will automate them. And once they are automated, they will run without resistance. Just like your current habits do now. This is the key shift. You do not need to force change forever. You only need to sustain it long enough for your brain to make it automatic. Because once something becomes easy, it becomes inevitable. Chapter 2 Summary. Your brain is designed for efficiency, not growth. It automates repeated actions to conserve energy. Over time, these automated actions reduce awareness and control. This creates a system where the easiest behaviors dominate your life. Repetition and efficiency reinforce each other, forming a powerful loop. To create change, you must work with this system, not against it, by making new behaviors easier to repeat. Practical exercises. Friction analysis. Identify one positive habit you struggle with. Ask, what makes this difficult to start? Reduce that friction. Make the first step as easy as possible. Automation awareness drill. Throughout the day, pause and ask. Am I choosing this action or repeating it? Do this at least 5 times. Energy mapping. Notice when your energy is highest and lowest. Schedule new behaviors during high energy periods to reduce resistance. Replace, don't remove. Instead of eliminating a habit, replace it. Your brain resists gaps, but accepts substitutions. Now, you understand that your brain automates behavior for efficiency. But this raises a deeper question. If your actions are automated, then who is actually in control? Because beneath your habits, there is something even more powerful shaping your life. Your identity. Coming up next. Chapter 3, Identity, the hidden script running your life. Why you keep becoming the same person every day. Chapter 3, Identity, the hidden script running your life. Why you keep becoming the same person every day. There is something deeper than your habits. Something more powerful than your routines. Something more persistent than your motivation. It is your identity. Your habits are what you do. Your identity is who you believe you are. And whether you realize it or not, your identity is directing your behavior. Every day, you are not just acting. You are confirming. Confirming a version of yourself that has been built over time. I'm disciplined. I'm lazy. I'm confident. I'm anxious. I'm consistent. I'm always distracted. These are not just descriptions. They are instructions. Your brain uses identity as a reference point. It asks, often unconsciously, what would someone like me do in this situation? And then it acts accordingly. This is why change is so difficult. Because when you try to change your behavior, you are often working against your identity. And identity always wins. You can force a new action temporarily. You can push yourself for a few days. But if that action does not align with how you see yourself, it will not last. Because your brain is constantly trying to maintain internal consistency. It wants your actions and your identity to match. So if you believe, I'm not someone who wakes up early, then waking up early feels unnatural, forced, unsustainable. Eventually, you return to your default pattern. Not because the habit failed, but because your identity rejected it. This is the hidden script. A set of internal beliefs that quietly dictate your behavior. And here is how it forms. Repetition. Every action you take is recorded. Not consciously, but neurologically. Your brain tracks patterns. If you repeat something often enough, your brain draws a conclusion. You did this consistently. So this must be who you are. If you procrastinate repeatedly, the brain concludes, I am someone who procrastinates. If you follow through repeatedly, it concludes, I am someone who finishes what I start. These conclusions become identity. And once they are formed, they begin to shape future behavior. This creates a powerful cycle. You act, the brain records, identity forms, identity influences future actions. And the cycle repeats. This is why people feel stuck in the same version of themselves. Not because they lack potential, but because they are reinforcing the same identity every day. You don't become someone new by thinking differently. You become someone new by acting differently, consistently. Because identity is not built from intention. It is built from evidence. Your brain does not care what you want to be. It cares what you repeatedly prove. This is the critical shift. If you want to change your life, you must change the evidence you give your brain. Not once. Not occasionally. But repeatedly. Because one action does not rewrite identity. But consistent action does. And here's the deeper insight. Your identity is not fixed. It feels fixed because it has been reinforced. But it is adaptable. It can be reshaped, rewritten, redefined. Through repetition. The same mechanism that trapped you can free you if you begin to act like the person you want to become. Even in small ways, your brain starts to update its conclusions. I showed up today. I followed through. I made a different choice. These are small pieces of evidence. But over time, they accumulate. And eventually, they form a new identity. This is not instant. It is gradual. But it is powerful. Because once your identity shifts, your behavior follows automatically. You no longer force discipline. You act in alignment with who you believe you are. This is where real change happens. Not at the level of action, but at the level of identity. Chapter 3 Summary. Your identity is the internal script that directs your behavior. It is formed through repeated actions and reinforced over time. Your brain seeks consistency between who you believe you are and how you act. This is why behavior change fails when it conflicts with identity. To create lasting change, you must provide new, consistent evidence that reshapes your identity. Practical exercises. Identity audit. Write down 5 statements you believe about yourself. Example, I am someone who. Identify which ones are limiting. Evidence tracking. Choose one identity you want to change. Each day, record one action that supports the new identity. Micro-identity shift. Instead of aiming for big change, ask, what would a slightly better version of me do right now? Act on that answer. Language reframe. Replace fixed statements. I am bad at this, I am learning to improve at this. This opens identity flexibility. Now, you understand that your identity is shaping your actions. But identity does not operate alone. It is reinforced by something even more subtle. Something that feels safe. Something that feels comfortable. And that comfort is what keeps the loop alive. Coming up next. Chapter 4, The Comfort Cycle. How familiarity quietly destroys growth. Chapter 4, The Comfort Cycle. How familiarity quietly destroys growth. Comfort feels harmless. It feels earned. It feels safe. It feels like stability. But beneath that feeling, there is a hidden cost. Because comfort is not just a state. It is a cycle. And once you are inside it, it becomes very difficult to leave. The comfort cycle begins with familiarity. Anything you repeat often becomes familiar. And anything familiar feels easier to engage with. Your brain recognizes it. Predict it. Trust it. This creates a sense of psychological safety. You know what to expect. You know how things will unfold. There are no surprises. And for your brain, that is ideal. Because uncertainty requires energy. It requires attention. It requires risk. So your brain naturally gravitates toward what is known. Even if what is known is limiting. This is the first stage of the comfort cycle. Familiarity creates ease. The second stage follows immediately. Ease creates preference. Once something feels easy, you begin to prefer it. You choose it more often. You return to it without thinking. Not because it is the best option, but because it is the least demanding. And then comes the third stage. Preference creates repetition. You repeat what you prefer. You reinforce what you repeat. And with enough repetition, that behavior becomes automatic. Now you are no longer choosing comfort. You are defaulting to it. This is where the cycle closes. Repetition strengthens familiarity. And familiarity pulls you back into comfort. Again. And again. And again. This is the comfort cycle. A self-reinforcing loop where familiarity ease preference, repetition, familiarity. At no point does this cycle ask, is this helping you grow? It only asks, is this comfortable? And comfort, by definition, avoids challenges. It avoids uncertainty. It avoids discomfort. But growth requires all three. This is the paradox. The very thing that makes you feel safe is the thing that prevents you from evolving. Because growth does not happen in familiar territory. It happens at the edge. At the point where something feels slightly uncomfortable. Slightly uncertain. Slightly unfamiliar. But the comfort cycle pulls you away from that edge. It brings you back to what you know. Back to predictable routines. Predictable thoughts. Predictable outcomes. And over time, this creates stagnation. Not because you are incapable of growth, but because you are constantly returning to comfort. This is why people often feel trapped in their current life. They are not lacking opportunities. They are not lacking potential. They are overexposed to comfort. And here is the deeper layer. Comfort does not feel like resistance. It feels like permission. It's okay to skip this today. It's fine to do what's easy. I'll try again tomorrow. These thoughts feel reasonable, logical, but they are part of the cycle. They keep you inside the familiar. And every time you choose comfort over challenge, you reinforce the loop. This is not about eliminating comfort entirely. That would be unrealistic and unnecessary. Comfort has a role. It allows recovery. It provides stability. It reduces stress. But when comfort becomes the default, it becomes a constraint. The key is not to reject comfort. It is to control it. To choose when to engage with it. And when to step beyond it. Because every time you move slightly outside your comfort zone, you introduce something new. A new action. A new experience. A new piece of evidence. And that is how the cycle begins to break. Not with extreme change, but with intentional discomfort. Small, controlled disruptions to familiarity. Because comfort thrives on repetition. And repetition can be interrupted. Chapter 4 Summary. The comfort cycle is a loop where familiarity creates ease, ease creates preference, preference creates repetition, and repetition reinforces familiarity. This cycle prioritizes comfort over growth, keeping you within predictable patterns. Comfort feels safe, but excessive reliance on it leads to stagnation. Growth requires stepping outside familiarity and introducing controlled discomfort. Practical exercises. Comfort awareness check. Throughout the day, ask, am I choosing this because it's effective, or because it's comfortable? Daily discomfort action. Do one small thing each day that feels slightly uncomfortable. Not extreme, just enough to break routine. Pattern disruption. Change one part of your daily routine. A different route, a different timing, a different sequence. Delay the easy option. When faced with a comfortable choice, delay it by 10 minutes. Use that time to consider a more challenging alternative. Now, you understand how comfort keeps you inside familiar patterns. But comfort alone is not enough to sustain repetition. There is another force at play. Something that reinforces your behavior at a deeper level. Your emotions. Because what you feel determines what you repeat. Coming up next. Chapter 5, Repetition and Emotional Conditioning. How feelings reinforce the same behaviors. Chapter 5, Repetition and Emotional Conditioning. How feelings reinforce the same behaviors. You don't just repeat actions. You repeat feelings. And those feelings are not random. They are conditioned. Every behavior you perform is connected to an emotional outcome. Sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes it's subtle. But it is always there. Relief. Pleasure. Comfort. Distraction. Avoidance. Your brain is constantly tracking these emotional results. And it learns quickly. If an action produces a desirable feeling, even temporarily, your brain marks it as valuable. And anything valuable gets repeated. This is emotional conditioning. A process where your brain links behaviors to emotional rewards or relief. Over time, this connection becomes automatic. You don't think, I will do this because it gives me relief. You simply feel the urge and act. This is why repetition is so powerful. It is not driven by logic. It is driven by emotion. Consider this. You feel stressed. Without thinking, you reach for your phone. You scroll. You distract yourself. For a moment, the stress decreases. Not completely, but enough. Your brain registers this. Scrolling reduces stress. Now the next time you feel stress, the urge appears again. Not as a conscious decision, but as a conditioned response. And with every repetition, the connection strengthens. Stress scroll relief. This becomes a loop. Not because scrolling is effective, but because it is emotionally rewarding. Even if the reward is short-lived. Even if it creates negative consequences later. Your brain prioritizes immediate emotional outcomes over long-term results. This is a critical insight. You do not repeat behaviors because they are good. You repeat them because they feel good or reduce discomfort. And this applies to everything. Procrastination. Overthinking. Avoidance. Even negative self-talk. These patterns persist because they serve an emotional function. Procrastination reduces pressure in the moment. Overthinking creates a sense of control. Avoidance eliminates immediate discomfort. They are not random weaknesses. They are conditioned responses. And because they are conditioned, they are reinforced. Every time you respond to a feeling with the same behavior, you strengthen the loop. The emotion becomes the trigger. The behavior becomes the solution. Even if it is not actually solving the problem. This is where people get trapped. They try to change their behavior without addressing the emotion. They say, I need to stop procrastinating. But they ignore the feeling that triggers it. So when the feeling returns, the behavior returns with it. This is why surface-level change fails. Because the root of repetition is emotional. To break the pattern, you must intervene at the emotional level. Not by eliminating emotions, that is impossible. But by changing your response to them. You must create new associations. New links between feeling and action. For example, stress movement instead of scrolling. Boredom creation instead of consumption. Anxiety action instead of avoidance. At first, this feels unnatural. Because the old pattern is stronger. It has been reinforced through repetition. But with consistency, the new pattern begins to form. The brain starts to update its associations. This feeling leads to this behavior. And over time, the emotional trigger no longer leads to the old response. It leads to a new one. This is how you recondition your system. Not by suppressing feelings, but by redirecting them. Because emotions are not the problem. They are signals. And once you learn to respond differently to those signals, you begin to break the loop. Chapter 5 Summary. Repetition is driven by emotional conditioning. Your brain links behaviors to emotional outcomes like relief, pleasure, or reduced discomfort. Even negative habits persist because they provide immediate emotional benefits. To break repetitive patterns, you must change how you respond to emotional triggers, not just the behavior itself. Practical exercises. Trigger mapping. Identify 3 recurring negative behaviors. For each one, write down the emotion that triggers it. Pause and label. When you feel a strong urge, pause and name the emotion. This is stress. This is boredom. This creates awareness before action. Response replacement. Choose one emotional trigger and assign a new response. Repeat this consistently. Delay reaction. When an urge appears, wait 2 minutes before acting. This weakens automatic responses. Now, You understand that emotions reinforce repetition. But emotions alone do not create lasting patterns. There is a structured system behind it. A mechanism your brain uses to automate behavior completely. A loop that runs whether you are aware of it or not. Coming up next. Chapter 6, The Habit Feedback Loop. Cue, action, reward, and why it never stops. Chapter 6, The Habit Feedback Loop. Cue, action, reward, and why it never stops. By now, you understand that repetition is not random. It is structured. There is a system behind every repeated behavior in your life. A loop. Precise. Predictable. And constantly running. This is the habit feedback loop. It consists of 3 components. Cue. Action. Reward. At first glance, this seems simple. But its simplicity is what makes it powerful. Because once this loop is established, it runs automatically. Without effort. Without awareness. Without interruption. Let's break it down. The loop always begins with a cue. A signal. Something that tells your brain, now is the time. This cue can be external. A notification on your phone. A specific location. A time of day. Or it can be internal. A feeling. A thought. A memory. The cue is not the behavior. It is the trigger. And your brain is constantly scanning for these triggers. Because once it recognizes a cue, it prepares the next step. The action. This is the behavior itself. Scrolling. Eating. Working. Avoiding. Thinking. The action is what you do in response to the cue. At this point, it may still feel like a choice. But if the loop is well established, it is already on autopilot. Then comes the third component. The reward. This is the outcome your brain is looking for. Relief. Pleasure. Distraction. Satisfaction. The reward is what reinforces the loop. It tells your brain, this worked. Remember this. And your brain does. It stores the sequence. Cue, action, reward. The next time the cue appears, the loop activates again. This is how habits are formed. But here's the deeper layer. Over time, the reward is no longer required to trigger the action. The expectation of the reward becomes enough. Your brain starts predicting the outcome. And that prediction creates a craving. You don't just respond to cues. You anticipate them. You feel the urge before the action happens. This is why habits feel automatic. Because they are no longer reactive. They are predictive. Your brain is running simulations. It sees the cue. It predicts the reward. And it initiates the action. All of this happens in seconds. Without conscious thought. This is why the loop is so difficult to break. You are not interrupting a single action. You are interrupting an entire system. And systems resist disruption. Because they are optimized for efficiency. Every time you complete the loop, you strengthen it. The neural pathway becomes faster. Stronger. More efficient. Until eventually, it becomes the default response. And once something is the default, it is incredibly persistent. This is why bad habits feel so hard to eliminate. Not because they are powerful, but because they are practiced. Repetition builds strength. And strength creates stability. So when you try to stop a habit by removing the action, the loop does not disappear. The cue is still there. The craving is still there. And without a replacement, the brain returns to the original behavior. This is why elimination fails. And replacement works. You cannot erase a loop. But you can rewire it. You keep the cue. You keep the reward. But you change the action. For example, cue, stress. Old action, scrolling. Reward, relief. New action, walking. Reward, relief. The structure remains. But the behavior changes. And with repetition, the new loop becomes stronger. This is the strategy. Not resistance. Not suppression. Redirection. Because the loop itself is not the enemy. It is a tool. A system that can work against you. Or for you. Depending on how it is used. Once you understand the loop, you gain leverage. You stop reacting blindly. You start designing your behavior. And that is where control begins. Chapter 6 Summary. The habit feedback loop consists of 3 parts: cue, action, and reward. This loop automates behavior through repetition and reinforcement. Over time, the brain begins to predict rewards, creating cravings that drive action. Habits persist because the loop remains intact, even if you try to stop the behavior. To change a habit, you must replace the action while keeping the cue and reward. Practical exercises. Loop breakdown. Identify one habit and break it into cue, action, reward. Write each part clearly. Cue awareness. Track when the habit occurs. What time, place, or emotion triggers it. Action replacement. Choose a new behavior that provides a similar reward. Practice it consistently when the cue appears. Reward identification. Ask, what am I actually getting from this habit? Focus on the emotional outcome, not the action. Now, you understand the system that drives repetition. But there is another consequence of living inside these loops. Something most people don't notice until years have passed. A distortion. Not in your actions, but in your perception of time. Coming up next. Chapter 7, Time Distortion, Why Years Feel the Same. The psychological cost of living on autopilot. Chapter 7, Time Distortion, Why Years Feel the Same. The psychological cost of living on autopilot. There is a strange phenomenon that happens when you live in repetition. Time begins to collapse. Days pass quickly. Weeks blur together. Months disappear. And then one day, you look back. And it feels like nothing really changed. This is not just perception. It is a psychological effect. A direct consequence of living inside repeated patterns. Your experience of time is not measured by clocks. It is measured by memory. Your brain does not record every moment equally. It prioritizes what is new, emotional, or unexpected. Novelty creates strong memory encoding. Repetition creates weak memory encoding. When something is new, your brain pays attention. It processes details. It stores the experience more vividly. But when something is repeated, your brain compresses it. It says, "I've seen this before. No need to store it again." So it skips over details. It reduces awareness. It minimizes the memory footprint. This is efficient. But it comes with a cost. When most of your days are made of repeated actions, there is very little new information being stored. So when you look back, there are fewer distinct memories to reference. And fewer memories create the illusion that time has passed faster. This is time distortion. It is not that time is actually moving faster. It is that your brain is recording less of it. This is why childhood often feels long and expansive. Everything is new. Every experience is unfamiliar. Every moment is filled with discovery. Your brain is constantly recording. But as you grow older, life becomes structured, predictable, repetitive. And your brain shifts into efficiency mode. It stops recording as much. So time feels compressed. This is the hidden cost of repetition. Not just stagnation in your actions, but compression in your experience. You are not just repeating your life. You are losing the richness of it. Because when awareness decreases, experience decreases. And when experience decreases, life begins to feel shorter. This is why people often say, "Where did the time go?" It didn't disappear. It just wasn't fully experienced. Now here is the critical insight. Repetition does not just shape your behavior. It shapes your perception of life itself. If every day feels the same, your brain treats it as the same. And when your brain treats it as the same, it stops distinguishing between days. So one day blends into the next, then into the next, until weeks feel like a single unit. Months feel like a blur. Years feel like a continuation of the same pattern. This is why breaking repetition is not just about growth. It is about reclaiming your experience of time. Because introducing novelty does something powerful. It forces your brain to pay attention again. It increases awareness. It creates stronger memory encoding. And suddenly, time begins to feel slower, fuller, more detailed. This is not about extreme change. You do not need to completely transform your life overnight. Small variations are enough. A new environment. A different routine. A new skill. A new conversation. Anything that disrupts predictability. Because predictability compresses time. And unpredictability expands it. This is how you stretch your experience of life. Not by adding more time, but by increasing how much of it you actually experience. Because in the end, your life is not measured in years. It is measured in moments you remember. And repetition quietly reduces those moments. Chapter 7 Summary. Time distortion occurs when repeated experiences reduce memory encoding, making time feel faster. Your brain prioritizes novelty and compresses familiar patterns. Living on autopilot leads to fewer distinct memories, creating the illusion of lost time. Breaking repetition introduces novelty, increases awareness, and expands your experience of life. Practical exercises. Novelty injection. Introduce one new experience daily. It can be small, but it must be different. Memory check reflection. At the end of the day, ask, what stood out today? If nothing stands out, repetition dominates. Routine variation. Change one consistent part of your schedule each week. Attention training. Slow down one activity and fully focus on it. Increase awareness to strengthen memory. Now, you understand how repetition compresses time. You see how it affects not just what you do, but how you experience your life. But awareness of the problem is not enough. Because there is a barrier most people hit at this stage. They begin to see the patterns, but they still cannot break them. Coming up next. Chapter 8, Breaking Awareness Barriers. Seeing the pattern without escaping it. Say, continue, and I will proceed with Chapter 8 fully expanded. Chapter 8, Breaking Awareness Barriers. Seeing the pattern without escaping it. At this point, something has changed. You can see it now. The patterns. The repetition. The loops run in the background. You notice your habits more clearly. You recognize your triggers. You begin to understand how your brain is operating. And yet, nothing fully changes. This is one of the most frustrating stages in personal transformation. Because awareness has increased. But behavior remains the same. You see the loop, but you are still inside it. This is the awareness barrier. A point where understanding is no longer the problem. But execution still is. Most people assume that awareness is enough. If I can just understand what's happening, I'll be able to change it. But awareness does not automatically lead to action. It creates a gap. A space between knowing and doing. And in that space, the old patterns still operate. Because the system you are trying to change is not intellectual. It is behavioral. It is emotional. It is automatic. You can recognize a habit in real time. And still perform it. You can say, I know I shouldn't be doing this. And continue doing it anyway. This is not a contradiction. It is a limitation of awareness. Because awareness is observed. But it does not intervene. Think of it this way. Awareness is like turning on the lights in a room. You can now see everything clearly. But nothing in the room has moved. The furniture is still in the same place. The obstacles are still there. Seeing them does not remove them. You still need to act. And this is where most people get stuck. They become highly aware, but remain behaviorally unchanged. They analyze their patterns. They reflect on their habits. They understand their triggers, but they do not interrupt the loop. And without interruption, the loop continues. This creates a dangerous illusion. The illusion of progress. Because understanding feels productive. It feels like movement, but without action. Nothing actually changes. This is why people can spend years learning about improvement without experiencing it. They are aware of their limitations, but they are still reinforcing them. So the question becomes, what is missing? The answer is simple. Intervention. Not just awareness of the pattern, but disruption of the pattern. Because the loop only breaks when something changes in real time. Not before. Not after. At the moment. When the cue appears. When the urge is felt. When the automatic action is about to happen. That is the point of leverage. And that moment is short. Often just a few seconds. If you miss it, the loop completes. And once it completes, the behavior is reinforced again. This is why timing matters. You do not need to control your entire day. You need to control the moment of decision. The microsecond where repetition becomes action. This requires more than awareness. It requires readiness. Preparation. A predefined response. Because in the moment, you will not think clearly. The old pattern is faster. So you must decide in advance. When this happens, I will do this instead. This is how you convert awareness into action. You create a bridge. A direct link between noticing the pattern and changing the response. Without that bridge, awareness remains passive. With that bridge, awareness becomes active. This is the shift. From an observer to the interrupter. From understanding to execution. And once you begin interrupting patterns consistently, something changes. The loop weakens. Not immediately, but gradually. Because every interrupted cycle is a break in reinforcement. A disruption in the system. And over time, those disruptions accumulate until the pattern is no longer dominant. This is how awareness becomes transformation. Not by seeing more, but by acting at the right moment. Chapter 8 Summary. Awareness alone does not create change. You can recognize patterns without breaking them. This creates an awareness barrier where understanding increases but behavior remains the same. Real change requires intervention at the moment the pattern occurs. By preparing a new response in advance, you can convert awareness into action and begin disrupting the loop. Practical exercises. If-then planning. Choose one habit and define. If this cue appears, then I will do this action instead. Real-time interruption. Catch one automatic behavior in the moment and stop it mid-action. Decision point awareness. Identify the exact moment a habit begins, not after it's completed. One pattern focus. Do not try to change everything. Focus on interrupting one loop consistently. Now, you understand that awareness must be paired with action. But interruption alone is not enough. Because breaking a pattern creates a gap. And if that gap is not filled, the brain will return to the old loop. So the next step is critical. You must not only disrupt the pattern, you must replace it. Coming up next. Chapter 9, Disrupting the Loop. Small interruptions that create massive change. Chapter 9, Disrupting the Loop. Small interruptions that create massive change. By now, you see the system. You understand the loop. You recognize the triggers. You are aware of the patterns. And in the last chapter, you learned something critical. Awareness must lead to intervention. But now we move one step further. Because interruption alone is not enough. You can stop a behavior once. You can resist an urge temporarily. But if nothing replaces that behavior, the loop rebuilds itself. Stronger. Faster. More resistant. This is where most people fail. They try to eliminate patterns without replacing them. And the brain does not accept emptiness. It is designed to complete loops. Cue action reward. If the action is missing, the brain searches for the fastest available substitute. And most of the time, it returns to the original behavior. This is why disruption must be strategic. Not random. Not reactive. Designed. Because the goal is not just to break the loop, The goal is to redirect it. This is where small interruptions become powerful. You do not need massive change. You need precise change. At the right moment. In the right place. With the right replacement. Because the system you are working with is sensitive. Small inputs can create large outputs. If they are applied consistently. Let's go back to the loop. Cue, action, reward. The cue is often fixed. The reward is often desired. So the point of leverage is the action. This is where you intervene. But instead of removing the action completely, you modify it. You shift it slightly. You redirect the behavior while preserving the structure. For example, you feel stressed. That is the cue. Your default action is to scroll. The reward is relief. Instead of trying to eliminate the urge, you replace the action. Stress walk. Stress breathe. Stress write. The reward remains. Relief. But the behavior changes. At first, this feels insignificant. Too small. Too simple. But this is where most people misunderstand change. They believe transformation requires intensity. But transformation actually requires consistency. A small interruption repeated daily becomes a new pattern. And a new pattern repeated long enough becomes automatic. This is how you rebuild the system. Not through force, but through precision. Now here is another important layer. Interruptions must be immediate. They must happen at the moment of the cue. Not later. Not after the behavior. In real time. Because once the old action begins, the loop is already in motion. And it is much harder to stop. So you must train yourself to act early. At the first signal. The first urge. The first thought. This is where control exists. In the beginning of the loop. Not the end. This is also why preparation matters. You cannot rely on improvisation. In the moment, your brain defaults to familiarity. So you must decide in advance. What will I do instead? And that decision must be simple. Clear. Easy to execute. Because complexity creates friction. And friction kills consistency. The easier the new action is, the more likely it will be repeated. And repetition is what creates change. Now let's go deeper. There is another type of interruption. Environmental disruption. Because your environment is filled with cues. Objects. Places. People. Digital signals. All of these trigger behavior. If you change the environment, you change the cues. And if you change the cues, you change the loop. This is one of the most effective strategies. Because it reduces the need for willpower. For example, if your phone triggers distraction, move it out of reach. If your workspace triggers procrastination, rearrange it. If a certain place reinforces a habit, change the location. These are not dramatic changes, but they are powerful. Because they alter the system at its source. And when the system changes, behavior follows. This is the key principle of this chapter. Small, consistent interruptions create large-scale transformation. Not instantly, but inevitably. Because every interruption is a break in repetition. And every break weakens the loop. Until eventually, the loop no longer defines you. Chapter 9 Summary. Breaking a habit requires more than stopping behavior, it requires replacing it. The habit loop must remain intact, but the action must change. Small, consistent interruptions at the moment of the cue create powerful long-term change. Environmental changes can also disrupt cues and reduce reliance on willpower. Transformation comes from precision and repetition, not intensity. Practical exercises. Action replacement plan. Choose one habit loop and define a new action that provides a similar reward. Immediate response training. Practice acting at the first sign of the cue, not after the behavior starts. Environment reset. Remove or modify one environmental trigger that reinforces a negative habit. Simplicity rule. Make your replacement behavior extremely easy to perform. Now, you understand how to disrupt and redirect patterns. But there is a deeper transformation still ahead. Because changing actions is powerful. But lasting change happens when identity shifts. When you are no longer trying to act differently. You simply are different. Coming up next. Chapter 10, Rewriting Identity Through Action. Becoming someone new by acting differently. Chapter 10, Rewriting Identity Through Action. Becoming someone new by acting differently. Up to this point, you have been working on the surface of behavior. You have identified loops. You have interrupted patterns. You have replaced actions. And that is powerful. But now we move to the deepest level of change. Identity. Because as long as your identity remains the same, your old patterns will always try to return. You can disrupt behavior temporarily. You can create short-term change. But if your internal self-image does not evolve, the system will reset. You will drift back. Not because you failed, but because your identity pulled you back into alignment. This is why lasting transformation requires something more. Not just new actions, but a new self-definition. And here is the critical truth. Identity is not changed by thinking. It is changed by evidence. You do not become someone new by telling yourself a different story. You become someone new by proving it, repeatedly. Your brain does not believe words. It believes patterns. If you say, "I am disciplined," but your actions are inconsistent, your brain rejects the statement, because it contradicts the evidence. But if you act with discipline consistently, even in small ways, your brain begins to update its conclusion. This is what I do. So this must be who I am. This is how identity shifts. Not through declarations, but through repetition. Now here is where most people make a mistake. They aim too high. They try to jump from one identity to a completely different one. From undisciplined to highly disciplined. From inactive to intensely productive. And this creates resistance. Because the gap is too large. The new identity feels unrealistic. Unfamiliar. Unbelievable. So the brain rejects it. Instead, identity must evolve gradually. Through what we can call microshifts. Small, consistent actions that slightly adjust how you see yourself. Not, "I am a completely different person." But, "I am becoming someone who does this." This subtle shift matters. You add a piece of evidence. And these pieces accumulate. One action may feel insignificant. But 10 actions begin to form a pattern. 50 actions begin to form consistency. 100 actions begin to form identity. This is the compounding effect of behavior. Small actions, repeated consistently, reshape how you see yourself. And once your identity begins to shift, something powerful happens. Your behavior becomes easier. Because you are no longer forcing change. You are expressing identity. You are acting in alignment with who you believe you are. This removes friction. It removes internal conflict. Because now, your actions and your identity are aligned. This is where transformation stabilizes. Now let's go deeper. There are 3 stages of identity change. Stage 1, conscious effort. You act differently on purpose. It feels unnatural. It requires focus. This is where most people stop. Because it feels difficult. But this stage is necessary. It creates the first pieces of evidence. Stage 2, reinforcement. You repeat the new behavior consistently. It becomes more familiar. It requires less effort. This is where the identity begins to shift. You start to think, "This is something I do." Stage 3, integration. The behavior becomes automatic. It feels natural. It aligns with your self-image. Now you are not trying to be different. You are different. This is the full transition. From effort to identity. And once you reach this stage, the system stabilizes. Because now, your identity is supporting your behavior. Not resisting it. Now here is the most important question. How do you start? The answer is simple. Choose one identity. Not 10. Not everything at once. One. And define it clearly. Not in abstract terms. but in behavioral terms. Not, I want to be successful, but, I am someone who completes what I start. Now ask, what does this person do daily? Then do that. In the smallest way possible. Consistency matters more than intensity. That small action becomes a pattern. That pattern becomes evidence. And that evidence becomes identity. This is how you become someone new. Not by changing everything at once, but by acting differently. Until it becomes who you are. Chapter 10 Summary. Identity is shaped by repeated actions, not thoughts. Lasting change occurs when behavior and identity align. Small, consistent actions create evidence that reshapes self-perception. Identity change happens in stages: conscious effort, reinforcement, and integration. To transform, focus on one identity and build it through repeated behavior. Practical exercises. Identity selection. Choose one identity you want to develop. Define it in terms of daily behavior. Evidence log. Track every action that supports this identity. Build a visible record of proof. Microcommitment. Make the action so small that it is impossible to avoid. Consistency over intensity. Focus on repeating the action daily, not doing it perfectly. Now, you understand how to rewrite identity through action. But to make this sustainable, you need structure. Because without structure, even the strongest intentions can collapse. Coming up next. Chapter 11, Designing a Conscious Life System. Replacing default patterns with intentional structure. Chapter 11, Designing a Conscious Life System. Replacing default patterns with intentional structure. By now, you understand something most people never fully grasp. Your life is not random. It is structured. Not always intentionally, but structurally. Your habits form patterns. Your patterns form systems. And your systems produce your outcomes. If your life feels repetitive, stagnant, or misaligned, it is not because you lack effort. It is because your current system is producing exactly those results. And systems are powerful. Because once they are in place, they run automatically. That is why change often feels temporary. You make a new effort. You change your behavior for a short time. But then you return to your baseline. Because the system pulls you back. This is the final layer of the repetition trap. Not just individual habits, but the architecture of your daily life. If you want lasting change, you must redesign the system itself. Not just what you do occasionally, but what your life defaults to. This is where conscious design begins. Instead of reacting to your day, you begin structuring it. Instead of allowing patterns to form randomly, you build them intentionally. This is not about control in the rigid sense. It is about direction. Because without direction, repetition takes over. And repetition defaults to what is easiest. So the question becomes, how do you design a system that works for you? It starts with clarity. You must define what matters. Not broadly. Not abstractly. Specifically. What kind of person are you becoming? What behaviors support that identity? What patterns need to exist daily? Once this is clear, you translate it into structure. And structure lives in 3 areas: time, environment, sequence. 1. Time structure. Your day is not just a flow of moments. It is a sequence of opportunities. If you do not assign intention to your time, it will be filled automatically. By habits. By distractions. By default patterns. So you must anchor your day. Not rigidly, but deliberately. Define key moments. Morning. Midday. Evening. Attach behaviors to these moments. Simple, repeatable actions that align with your identity. This creates stability. A framework your day can follow. 2. Environment design. Your environment is not neutral. It is active. It influences your behavior constantly. Every object, every space, every signal is either reinforcing your patterns or working against them. If your environment supports distraction, you will be distracted. If it supports focus, you will focus. This is not about discipline. It is about design. You remove friction from desired behaviors. You add friction to undesired ones. You make the right action easier, and the wrong action is harder. This shifts the balance. Not through force, but through structure. 3. Behavioral sequence. Your actions are not isolated. They are connected. One action leads to another. This is called chaining. If you wake up and check your phone, that action influences everything that follows. If you wake up and move your body, that creates a different chain. So instead of focusing on individual habits, you design sequences. A flow of actions that naturally lead into each other. For example, wake up, move, reflect, start work. This creates momentum. Because you are not deciding each step individually. You are following a sequence. And sequences reduce decision fatigue, which increases consistency. Now, when these 3 elements align, something powerful happens. Your system begins to support your identity. Instead of relying on motivation, you rely on structure. Instead of fighting your environment, you use it. Instead of making constant decisions, you follow designed patterns. This is how you escape the repetition trap permanently. Not by eliminating repetition, but by controlling it. Because repetition itself is not the problem. Unconscious repetition is. When repetition becomes intentional, it becomes a tool. A force that builds your life instead of limiting it. Now here is the final insight. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. So if your system is weak, your results will be inconsistent. If your system is strong, your results become predictable. And predictability, when aligned with intention, creates progress. Chapter 11 Summary. Your life is shaped by systems, not isolated actions. Without intentional design, default patterns take over. A conscious life system includes structured time, intentional environments, and behavioral sequences. By aligning your system with your identity, you create consistency without relying on motivation. Practical exercises. System mapping. Write down your current daily structure. Identify where repetition is unconscious. Anchor habits. Choose 3 key moments in your day and assign 1 intentional action to each. Environment audit. Remove 1 distraction and add 1 supportive element to your space. Sequence design. Create a simple morning or evening sequence and repeat it daily. Now, you have reached the final stage. You understand the loop. You have disrupted patterns. You have begun rewriting identity. And now, you are building systems. But there is one final question. How do you ensure you never fall back into the trap? Because the loop is always there. Waiting. Ready to reform. Coming up next. Chapter 12, Escaping the Trap Permanently. How to stay free from the cycle of repetition. Chapter 12, Escaping the Trap Permanently. How to stay free from the cycle of repetition. At this point, you understand the system. You have seen the loop. You have broken patterns. You have reshaped behavior. You have begun rewriting identity. You have designed a structure. But now comes the most important question. How do you make this last? Because the repetition trap does not disappear. It is always there. Your brain will always seek efficiency. It will always try to automate behavior. It will always prefer the familiar. This is not something you eliminate. It is something you manage. And if you are not intentional, the system will rebuild itself. Quietly. Gradually. Without you noticing. This is how people fall back. Not suddenly. But slowly. They stop paying attention. They relax their structure. They drift into familiarity. And over time, the old patterns return. This is why permanence is not about a final breakthrough. It is about maintenance. Not effort in the traditional sense, but awareness applied consistently. Because freedom from the loop is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing process. Now here is the key shift. You do not aim to avoid repetition. You aim to control it. Because repetition is inevitable. You will always repeat something. The question is, will it be intentional or automatic? If it is automatic, it will default to comfort. If it is intentional, it will align with growth. So the goal is not to remove repetition. It is to direct it. This requires 3 long-term principles. 1. Continuous awareness. Awareness is not a one-time realization. It is a practice. You must continue observing your patterns. Not obsessively, but consistently. Check in with yourself. What am I repeating right now? Is this aligned with who I want to become? Because the moment awareness fades, automation returns. And automation leads back to the loop. 2. Periodic disruption. Even well-designed systems can become rigid over time. What once served you can become another form of repetition. So you must introduce disruption. Intentionally. Regularly. Change your routines slightly. Challenge your patterns. Step outside your structure. This prevents stagnation. It keeps your system adaptive, flexible, alive. Because growth requires variation, not just consistency. 3. Identity reinforcement. Your identity must be maintained. Not through words, but through action. You must continue producing evidence. Small actions that confirm, this is who I am. Because identity is not permanent. It is sustained through repetition. If the evidence stops, the identity weakens. And when identity weakens, old patterns can return. So you reinforce it. Daily. Through behavior. Now here is the deeper truth. You will never be completely free from the possibility of falling back. And that is not a flaw. It is reality. But falling back is no longer a failure. It is feedback. Because now, you can recognize it. You can interrupt it. You can correct it. This is the difference. Before, the loop controlled you. Now, you can see it forming. And that awareness gives you power. You may step off the path temporarily, but you will not stay lost. Because you understand the system. And understanding creates control. Not perfect control, but functional control. Enough to adjust. Enough to realign. Enough to move forward again. This is what permanence actually looks like. Not perfection, but recovery. Don't ever repeat mistakes, but not staying in them. This is how you stay free. Not by escaping the loop entirely, but by never becoming unconscious inside it again. Chapter 12 Summary. The repetition trap never fully disappears, it must be managed continuously. Lasting change comes from directing repetition intentionally rather than avoiding it. Freedom is maintained through ongoing awareness, periodic disruption, and identity reinforcement. Setbacks are not failures, they are opportunities to reapply control. Practical exercises. Weekly awareness check. Once a week, review your patterns. Ask, what am I repeating that no longer serves me? Scheduled disruption. Intentionally change one routine each week to prevent stagnation. Identity reinforcement action. Perform one daily action that confirms your chosen identity. Recovery mindset. When you fall back into old patterns, respond immediately. Interrupt, adjust, and continue. Conclusion. You began this journey with a simple idea. That your life felt repetitive. That something was holding you in place. That despite effort, things were not changing the way you expected. Now you see why. You were not stuck because of a lack of ability. You were stuck because of repetition. A system running beneath your awareness. Shaping your actions. Reinforcing your identity. Controlling your direction. But now, that system is no longer invisible. You understand the loop. You see how your brain automates behavior. How comfort reinforces patterns. How emotions condition repetition. How identity locks actions into place. And more importantly, you know how to break it. You know how to interrupt patterns. How to replace behaviors. How to reshape identity. How to design systems. You are no longer reacting. You are designing. This is the shift. From unconscious repetition to intentional creation. Your life will always be built on repetition. But now, you choose what gets repeated. And that changes everything. Because the smallest repeated action becomes the foundation of your future. So the question is no longer, why is my life the same? The question is, what am I repeating that is creating it? And once you answer that, you gain control. Not all at once, but step by step, action by action, pattern by pattern, until one day, you look at your life again. And this time, it is not the same. If this audiobook helped you see your life differently, subscribe to MindLab audiobooks for more deep explorations into the systems shaping your behavior, your thinking, and your reality. Your mind is not fixed. Your patterns are not permanent. And your life is not locked. It is being built. Every single day. Through repetition. And now, you are in control of it. Conclusion. At the beginning of this journey, you were introduced to a simple but unsettling idea. That your life might not be as free as it feels. That's beneath your daily actions. There is a system. A loop. Quietly repeating itself. Day after day. You wake up. You think familiar thoughts. You follow familiar routines. You respond in predictable ways. And over time, those repetitions begin to shape everything. Your behavior. Your identity. Your direction. Not through one big decision, but through thousands of small ones. Unnoticed. Unquestioned. Repeated. That is the repetition trap. And for most people, it remains invisible. They feel stuck, but don't know why. They want change, but don't know what's holding them back. They search for motivation. For discipline. For some external solution. Without realizing the real issue is internal. Structural. Repetitive. But now, you see it. You understand that your brain is wired for efficiency. That it automates behavior to conserve energy. That it builds patterns and then protects them. You understand that comfort reinforces those patterns. Those emotions strengthen them. That identity locks them into place. And most importantly, you understand that repetition is not neutral. It is directional. It is always building something. The question is, what is it building? Because whether you are aware of it or not, your daily actions are constructing your future. One repetition at a time. This is where your power begins. Not in massive change. Not in sudden transformation. But in awareness. And then, in deliberate action. You have learned how to see the loop. How to interrupt it. How to replace patterns. How to reshape identity. How to design systems that support your growth. These are not temporary tools. They are permanent advantages. Because once you understand the system, you cannot go back to being fully unconscious inside it. You may slip. You may fall back into old patterns. But now, you will notice. And that changes everything. Because awareness creates a gap. And inside that gap, you have a choice. To repeat the past. Or to create something new. This is the defining moment. Not once in your life. But every single day. In small decisions. In quiet moments. In actions that seem insignificant. But they are not. Because repetition compounds. What you do once may not matter. But what you do consistently. Become who you are. And who you are determines the life you live. So if there is one thing to carry forward from this audiobook, it is this. You do not need to change everything. You only need to change what you repeat. Because when repetition changes, everything else follows. Your habits shift. Your identity evolves. Your system realigns. Your life transforms. Not instantly, but inevitably. And one day, you will look back again. Just like you have before. But this time, something will be different. You will not see years that blurred together. You will not feel like time disappeared. You will see change. Growth. Movement. Because you were no longer repeating unconsciously. You were creating intentionally. That is the escape. Not from repetition itself, but from unconscious repetition. Because repetition is not your enemy. It is your most powerful tool. And now, you know how to use it. If this audiobook shifted the way you see your life, subscribe to MindLab audiobooks for more deep explorations into the hidden systems shaping your behavior, your thinking, and your reality. Your mind is adaptable. Your patterns are changeable. And your life is not fixed. It is being built. Every single day. Through repetition. And now, you are the one building it. Final words. Before you go, take a moment and reflect on this. Nothing in your life changes until what you repeat changes. Not your goals. Not your intentions. Not your plans. Only your patterns. Because your life is not built in big moments. It is built in small ones. Repeated daily. Quietly. Consistently. And now, you are no longer unaware of that process. You see it. Which means from this point forward, every action carries weight. Every choice becomes a direction. Every repetition becomes construction. So don't underestimate the small shift. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Start with one change. One interruption. One new pattern. And let repetition do the rest. And if this audiobook opened your eyes, then this is only the beginning. To go deeper into the systems shaping your mind and your life, make sure you listen to the previous MindLab audiobooks. The Comfort Zone Trap. Why safety is slowly destroying your potential. The Awakening Mind. Why most people are living on autopilot and don't know it. The Fear Barrier. Why you're stuck and how fear is controlling your life. The life you're not living. What happens when you never take the risk? Reprogram your limits. Break free from the invisible rules holding you back. The Habit Code. How your daily actions are quietly controlling your entire life. The Identity Loop. Why you can't change your habits even when you try. Each one builds on the last. Each one reveals another layer. And together, they give you the complete system. And coming next, the 1% shift. How small habits quietly build or destroy your future. Because in the end, it's never the big changes that define your life. It's the small ones. Repeated every day. If you found value in this audiobook, like this video. Leave a comment with your biggest insight. Share it with at least 7 people who need to hear this. And most importantly, subscribe to MindLab audiobooks. Because once you understand how your mind works, you stop living by default. And you start living by design. This is MindLab audiobooks. And this is where change begins.